Nice to meet you, Stephanie.
Nice to meet you.
I generally ask parties about their platforms. And then since you're running for office, I'd like to know like your team, your strategy, your ballot access issues, your platform for your campaign, and things like that. And also the issue of woke capitalism. I was working at this place where a Fortune 500 company, and I was unionizing the place. And then later, they were against unions, but it seemed like they were in support of everything else. Like the CEO came out and said that she supports Black Lives Matter, and we had talks about police brutality. It's very pertinent because it's hard to deal with when all these corporations are looking like they're progressive.
One of the things I often talk about is the difference between liberal identity politics type feminism and the radical, which by radical I mean trans friendly, not the TERF type, radical feminism, and how socialist feminism differs from liberal identity politics.
Yes. Yeah.
But then people think trans exclusion or radical feminism, and that's definitely not us.
If you criticize feminism, some people might think, why, how could you criticize feminism? But there are certainly forms of it that are bad, that are harmful.
Yeah, I mean, if you're not including huge swaths of women, like working class women or trans women in your feminism, you're not a feminist.
Oh, there you go. Welcome to Long River Alternative Parties podcast. Today, friends, we have another exciting pair of guests on our podcast today. They are running for office under the Socialist Party. So we're going to talk about the exciting campaign they have ahead of us today. So welcome to the podcast. Let's get started by you both kindly giving us an introduction to yourself. First, by starting, give us your name and tell our audience, then to them, what party you represent.
My name is William Stodden, and like Stephanie, I represent the Socialist Party USA. This is the party of Eugene Debs, Norman Thomas, and several other luminaries throughout the 20th century of the United States. It was initially founded as an outgrowth of the labor movement. Eugene Debs, if you'll recall, was a labor organizer in the late 19th century and in the early 20th century. And then the Socialist Party was founded in 1901. It proceeded to run candidates and everything like that. In 1920, for example, Eugene Debs was running a campaign from the United States Federal Penitentiary in Atlanta, where he got over 1 million votes. And so that's the legacy that we've inherited in the Socialist Party USA. And like that, we stand for a lot of the same things that the Socialist Party has stood for a very long time.
Awesome. And you, Stephanie?
Yeah, my name's Stodden Cholensky. My pronouns are she, her. I have been in the Socialist Party USA for over 20 years. I started out in the Young People's Socialist League, otherwise known as YPSL. I did some organizing in Denver. I helped form a local there. I also have worked in Minnesota and formed locals here where I'm at now in Minneapolis twice. And I helped build the Northern Piedmont local in North Carolina. I've been involved in many campaigns, mostly for a local office. I volunteered on many presidential campaigns, but this is my first time as a candidate. And I've also served on the national committee of the Socialist Party USA, and I have served as co-chair.
Thank you, too, for that introduction. Let us talk about your campaign and your party. So kindly give us an overview of first what the party stands for in general, and also what your specific campaign platform is.
Okay. One thing that distinguishes us is we are an independent socialist party. We run candidates independent of the two capitalist parties, namely Democrats and Republicans. We are also a multi-tendency party, and we are a socialist feminist party. So we practice intersectional socialist feminism, and we are also grassroots based rather than top down. Our party is local based. And all these are reasons the Socialist Party USA was the party I joined. My personal political philosophy you might categorize as anarcho-communism or anarcho-socialism. Okay. I'm also a socialist feminist. But we have socialists of all stripes in our party as long as they agree to the statement of principles and you do not work with the Democrats. You can be a member of the Socialist Party USA.
Our campaign specifically is running for a number of reasons. We were charged by our convention primarily to run a campaign aimed at drawing attention to socialism, to the Socialist Party and our part in the socialist movement in the United States, as well as to sort of I don't know if you'd say protest or trying to challenge the duopoly in this country, which is controlled by the Democratic and the Republican Party, who we argue are both capitalist parties. And there's really not a whole lot of difference between them. I always say the Democratic Party is like the heads of a penny, and the Republican Party is the tails of a penny. And there's about a penny's worth of difference between the two of them. But we don't support that duopoly. We're running as a sort of a challenge to that. We're not under any kind of delusion that we're actually going to get over 200 electoral college votes necessary to obtain the presidency, but that's not really what we're working on here. We're working to raise awareness about socialism. We're working with other socialist parties and other leftist parties in general in opposing the Democratic Party and what they're trying to do in this country, and to raise awareness and bring awareness about socialism to people, so that maybe we'll do pretty good this election, but maybe next time we'll do even better, and maybe next time we'll do even better, and get into a mode where people are actually thinking about socialism as an alternative to capitalism in this country, rather than just something that's on the fringe that nobody really pays any attention to. So our goal primarily is to educate people about socialism, to agitate and get people excited about socialism, and to organize people around socialism and socialist ideas, socialist policies, and socialist preferences, to get people to come out and start supporting socialism rather than just claiming socialism and then going and voting for the Democrats.
I really think we have a great opportunity now. There's so many reasons this campaign is important. Obviously, we're dealing with an existential threat with climate change. We're also seeing threats to the basic institutions of, I don't want to say democracy, because democracy is a very strong word for what we have in the US. We have more of a oligarchy of the wealthy, but Americans are increasingly disillusioned with both parties. And why shouldn't they be? What have they ever done to actually deliver on their promises to help working people? The Democrats and Republicans, they may differ on wedge issues, but when it comes down to it, they are pro-capitalist, pro-imperialist parties. And that's always where they're going to come down. And if they can do a little, like have a little rainbow flag here or stick up for someone's rights there, they might do that. It's usually just pandering, and it never, ever leads to any systemic change. Systemic change has always come from grassroots organizing, and especially labor power as well. If we're not going to make a stand for a better world now, my question is, when are we going to do it? When are we going to do what? Is it when the oceans are poisoned and the forests are gone and the earth is practically unlivable and we've driven so many species to extinction? We're running out of time here, and neither party offers any real solutions. They just get mired up in these culture wars. And that doesn't mean things like trans rights don't matter. They're vital. We don't trust the Democratic Party to actually stick up for them, however, because they never have. And it's always been a tool for them to basically pander to get votes.
Sure. So it sounds like you're playing the long game and you don't want to cave into the concession makers that are ruling the day.
That's right. This is socialism right now. When people think of socialism in the United States, they think of someone like Bernie Sanders or AOC.
Yep.
And Bernie Sanders and AOC both vote with the Democratic Party on a regular basis. We can't really call them socialists because those people never ever advocated for nationalization of healthcare, for example, which would dramatically improve healthcare options for people, especially the poor and the working people in this country, who have to pay through the nose for health insurance that's really kind of generic and useless. If you talk about the Green New Deal or something like that, what you're really doing is talking about the federal government subsidizing private capital, basically continuing the socialization of profit and the privatization of risk in this country. We're certainly opposed to that. And one thing we've come up with as an idea, one of the ways we could solve a lot of these problems is just by nationalizing the Fortune 500, just going straight down the list, 500 companies right there who are responsible for a tremendous percentage of the wealth that's generated in this country. Nationalize those things and hand them over to the workers. Or if we decide that a hedge fund isn't really of any value to society, it has no social value, just basically nationalize it, expropriate the property, and divide it up amongst the workers that used to work there. I think that a lot of the problems that are caused by this country are caused by these big industries that just are able to operate with complete impunity. And if we were to go right down the list and just take care of that, we could solve a lot of problems just by stopping people who are hurting the environment or promoting division in our society or keeping people poor. We could stop them from doing that, which would, in and of itself, lead to a dramatic increase in the quality of life for working people in this country.
Yeah,
Wow.
exactly. And what we offer on the ballot is a choice. Neither party, neither the Democrats or Republican, offer that choice because at the end of the day, they're capitalists. They do not want a fundamental transformation of the economy like we do. They do not want this economy to be run for and by the working people. They want an oligarchy. They want the status quo. And no matter how much they talk about change or revolution, that's why people like Bernie Sanders twist the word socialism into meaning like a less evil version of capitalism. And what you end up with is what people think our options are. We either have capitalism with absolutely no limits, or we have some limits on capitalism and maybe a welfare state where we have to fight tooth and nail just to get our basic needs met. We want an economy that actually serves humanity, all of humanity, not just a few at the top. And that is something we could do. There's no good reason it shouldn't be that way, other than that's the status quo. And of course, it is very hard to get to that because the people at the top are not going to give up this power easily, obviously. That's why we need to build a mass movement. That's the only way working people have ever gotten rights and a better life.
Okay. I get a good overview of your perspective. In 2023, what are the main issues that you're hoping to address that you think would make the biggest difference in moving the ball forward in the direction of socialism?
Well, we think it's very important to have socialized ownership of huge sectors of the economy, if not the entire economy. And what we mean by socialized ownership is we mean not just some overarching oppressive state apparatus, but we're actually talking about economic democracy, where if you take any company, let's take,
Okay.
for example, Amazon, they have they have thousands of workers at Amazon. Let's take any given Amazon plant. Why shouldn't the workers there have a say in not only how that operation is run? Those are the people that have the most knowledge with how the operation is run because they're the people who are on the floor actually operating the machines. It's not the bosses in some office building in some faraway city that know how that warehouse works. It's the workers. So the workers should have a say in control in how that thing works. But not only that, but also workers should have the opportunity to reap the benefits of their labor and share in the profits of that company. So we're talking about socializing huge chunks of the economy. And I think that's one of the first and foremost proposals that we would promote on this campaign of socializing and nationalizing large portions of the economy. It wouldn't be a top-down type of thing. It wouldn't be this oppressive state bureaucracy. It would be the workers themselves deciding how they want to run the company and how much they want to work for, what their benefits and their compensation should be, and what the benefits and the compensation of their managers should be. The workers outnumber the bosses. They should all have a vote. That's called economic democracy. Other things like promoting environmentalism and conservation in our society, where we could develop a sustainable use of our natural resources in this country in a way that don't deplete the natural resources and in a way that doesn't pollute the atmosphere and the groundwater and the land to utilize those resources. We're going to be talking about woke capitalism a little bit later on, but we also want to promote a radical form of equality where there aren't these arbitrary differences between individuals that determine their position and their relative access to power in the society, where everybody, as you can see, I'm a white man, a straight white man. Everyone should have the same rights as I do. It doesn't matter what their status is, whether they're black, whether they're female, whether they're rich or poor. They should all have exactly the same rights and privileges in the society from a political and a social perspective as I do. That's another big thing that we can actually advance right now on the campaign trail here in 2023 and then later on in 2024.
Another aspect of our platform and what we offer is anti-imperialism. Both Bill and I,
Okay.
the party itself, is staunchly anti-war, staunchly anti-imperialism. We want to close all U.S. military facilities at home and abroad. We want an end to our weapons of mass destruction and nuclear arsenal. Obviously, we support the sovereignty of Palestine and oppose the apartheid state of Israel. Right now, we live in a system not only of wealth inequality domestically, but massive wealth inequality worldwide. That's one reason I don't support welfare state, because nations that have these capitalist welfare states are able to maintain them because they rely on that wealth inequality. They rely on us exploiting primarily the global South for profit. A lot of people ask, how do you pay for this? It's very easy to pay for this when you look at what we spend on our military, even on foreign military aid. The U.S. sends military funding to 72% of the world's dictatorships. Now tell me, how does a country that does something like that defend itself as a guardian of democracy? Of course, socialists have an answer for that. We've never seen the United States as a guardian of democracy. It's always been a guardian of and fought for the owning classes. The working class fights in these imperialist wars while the owning classes profit. And we want to break up that war industry that has caused horrendous amounts of suffering and inequality. These are some of the biggest threats to humanity. These are some of the biggest causes of suffering in the world. Unfortunately, the U.S. is very complicit in the cause of a lot of this misery. And we demand a system that we can be proud of, and a democratic system that doesn't rely on exploitation and violence to exist.
That sounds good. That sounds good. That was a good overview of the platform you have. One time, a guest of ours mentioned a theory I never heard before. He said a main reason we have ballot access is in reaction to the Red Scare. They didn't want the leftist and socialist communist type parties to be on the ballot. So have you ever heard that? And also, in regards to this election, what are the ballot access issues you have to overcome to get onto the ballot?
I could answer a little bit of that. I hadn't heard it referred to as specifically with regard to the Red Scare, because our ballot access problems have been going on much longer than there's been really Red Scares in this country. It's always been a way for elites to ensure that they have the ability to narrow the choices down to two and only two legitimate or quote unquote legitimate options for voters to choose from. You can look at things in the past where they talk about single member districts. There's no law that says that there has to be single member districts. You can make a state with 3 congressional districts. You can make that in a large state if you want and have 3 different congressional representatives selected however you want. That's not necessarily in the Constitution that it has to be single member districts. But our system, which is largely single member districts, has been decided that way because they want to make sure that the elections usually produce something like a majority, or if not a majority, at least a plurality, simply because that's the best way, it's the easiest way for elite parties to remain in power. But one of your previous shows that I had listened to that I mentioned earlier talked about changing the Electoral College to have basically proportional representation at the state level. This might be a good idea, and it might actually help with ballot access, because then states wouldn't necessarily have such an incentive to limit the ballot access. But you could see going into a system like that parties would fight tooth and nail to protect the system as it is, to protect the primary and the caucus system as it exists, because that guarantees that they will be on the ballot, and third parties like the Socialist Party USA will stay completely off the ballot, and parties that can mount a much more serious threat to the domination of the Democratic and Republican parties, like, for example, the Greens, will stay completely off the ballot. So there's not a lot of incentive for the people that hold all of the power to change the system in a way that would allow smaller parties to effectively compete in elections and potentially represent larger swaths of the population in a genuinely democratic government or a genuinely democratic election, which is one of the reasons why I say in the United States we have something more along the lines of a formal democracy rather than a substantive democracy, a democracy that's that just looks like a democracy but isn't ever really a democracy and has none of the substantive characteristics of a democracy.
Yes, and like you mentioned, ballot access laws are used to prevent third parties from winning elections, even being able to participate in elections, which is incredibly undemocratic. Here in Minnesota, we were, I don't want to say fortunate enough, because it was not fortunate. It was a lot of hard work. We were able to get 3 Socialist Party members elected to local office within the last couple of years. And the primary response seemed to be not to look at our policies, see why our candidates are so successful despite all the hurdles that we have to overcome to even get on the ballot, much less win. The response was to make sure that it's even harder for third parties to get on the ballot or win elections, which shows that the focus is not on democracy. The focus is on power. That's why we have these crazy gerrymandered districts. And it's not just the Republicans. The Democrats do it too. They are definitely all about restricting third parties from getting on the ballot and winning elections. And of course, it's gotten worse now with Citizens United and other campaign finance laws. There's so much dark money being poured into these elections that one study showed recently, public opinion has very little effect on policy, but what the 1% wants, and especially what they fund, is it fits much greater to what is actually passed. So we want public financing for candidates, for all candidates, not just the two parties. We want to limit how much personal financing people can do for their campaigns, because that obviously gives the wealthy an unfair advantage. And politicians, by and large, are the wealthy right now. Just look at the U.S. House and Senate. It's almost all millionaires, even some billionaires. And that is not representative at all of the US. Even a billionaire with the best intentions, which I can't imagine what that would be like, but let's just say that was a thing. They are not going to be able to accurately and properly represent their constituents that are working class, because they just do not live in that same world. Ultimately, we understand that this campaign is a strategy to spread class consciousness, to build knowledge on what socialism is, to refute all the ridiculous things that Americans believe about socialism. But we do understand that real change for the working class does not come through the ballot box. We will never vote socialism into office. Those in power would never allow that. Whenever leftist groups have gained some traction, they are always met with violence. We suspect that if we were to actually threaten those in power with a different form of government, even if we want to institute this democratically, I do not suspect they would allow that to happen, which is why it's so important for us to build a mass movement, because we know that they will try to crush us. Ultimately, they will fail. Capitalism will fall. It is an unsustainable system. The question is not whether we will continue to be capitalist, but what will come next, and if we will still be around to see what next.
So if you don't think socialism will come to the ballot box, how do you see it coming into power?
In a word, revolution. We can decide whether or not the revolution will be violent or not, but at the end of the day, the choice for violence always comes from the people with the power. The people who don't have the
Okay.
power are not the people that ever start violence. I always point to the idea that this liberal, John F. Kennedy, said, that's a very useful statement, even if I don't necessarily agree with anything else he believed, but those who make peaceful revolution impossible make violent revolution inevitable. We can make a change. The change is going to need to be made. The change needs to be made right now. The change needs to be made yesterday. We can have that change through peace, peaceful means, and the society can change into a way that's more sustainable for the rest of us, not just for the few of us who are currently benefiting from the system. Or they'll bring the violence to us when we start demanding things. At the end of the day, people can only get pushed around for so long. Eventually, something's going to happen. Something's going to snap in this country, and then it's going to be a really radical thing that the status quo can no longer sustain itself. And like Stephanie said, the question is not whether or not change is going to happen. Change is going to happen. It's going to happen, guaranteed. The question is whether or not it will look like something that benefits society or something that looks more like fascism. And right now, with the left being as disorganized as it is, and continuing to believe that Joe Biden is a reasonable alternative to Donald Trump, which is just a ridiculous idea. As long as the left continues to their ducks in the row behind the Democrats, we're going to have fascism. That's going to be the result. So what we need to do is we need to go out and make whatever difference we can right now using whatever methods we possibly can, elections being one of them. Running for president is one of the methods that we have. Unionization, having teach-ins, having sit-ins, joining other adjacent movements and working with them to get the word about socialism out, doing whatever we possibly can to ensure that fascism is not the result of the inevitable change which is on its way. I think that's going to happen. Revolution is on its way. If we continue to do what we're going to do, it's just going to hasten it along. So if you don't want that violent revolution, maybe you ought to support socialism and try to make that peaceful change where people start taking their own lives into their own hands, taking control of their own futures, and not putting up with this system anymore.
Yeah. And that is a big motivating factor for me, because I do not want violence. I know who is going to be hurt most by this violence. Obviously, we do not expect to go one on one, toe to toe with the US military and win. That's not how this works. The workers' power has always been in with whether they withhold their labor, in striking, in general strikes and direct action, in collective bargaining. So we can leverage that for change. But when we do, when we have, it's always been met with violence. Even though we might not want that, we should be prepared for that. Bill is right that it's a sad time. We will see this change, and we do see the threat that instead of going the way towards peace and egalitarianism, we could see a more fascist revolution. It's one reason the Democrats they just do not have any answers. The right has been leaning into this far right populism as a way to speak to a lot of people's anger and their worst tendencies. And the left is so fractured and weak right now. Democrats never oppose fascists, especially when they get power. They will always fall in line behind the fascists. Historically, that's been true. Democrats, even now, even with the fascists, at least the farthest of the right, not holding complete power, they will always side with the right. They would always rather have fascism than communism, because at the end of the day, they are capitalists. If I could say one thing about the Democratic Party, at the end of the day, they are capitalists. They're going to be capitalists. I wouldn't expect them to ever be anything else but capitalists. So if you do not want capitalism, do not support the Democratic Party. You're not going to bring them over. It's just not how it works. You will use all your energies trying to make a change into reforms that ultimately don't accomplish much of anything, unfortunately. My personal plan for revolutionary change does not require converting 7 billion people to every aspect of my ideology. I realize that's not realistic. That's one reason I'm part of a multi-tendency party, because if we're going to have a working class party, we need a multi-tendency party. We need to work together around our common goals, not a single strict ideology. I grow tired of the cynicism that has taken root in the revolutionary left. I think we need to be realistic, but we can't just throw up our hands and give up. This is the fight of our lifetimes. This is the fight for humanity itself. As long as the left wastes our time and effort tearing each other down and arguing about whatever historical points, not that these points don't matter, but if we don't work together, the right will destroy us. I really do want to build a working class movement of people of all sorts of anti-capitalist, socialist, Marxist, anarchist ideologies. And I get laughed at for this. And it's not because I don't understand the differences between these ideologies. I just think it's to the point that if we're not going to work together now, when are we going to do it? Ultimately, we want the same thing. We might disagree on how to get there, but we want a classless, stateless society. We want a revolutionary system that is completely divorced from the capitalist system. And I'm willing to work with anyone who is willing to do that, as long as they're not like bigots or some other counter-revolutionary aspect of their ideology. And there's so many people that want this right now, especially among young people. We have such an opportunity, and I think we can do it. I know we can do it. It's really in our hands now. I realize that's a big responsibility. It weighs on me, I'm sure, as it does Bill, but we can do this. We can build this better society. People before us have unionized and drastically improved the conditions of working people. People have abolished oppressive systems, and we can do this. It's just we have to build the movement and do the work.
And I just want to add one
Sure.
thing to what Stephanie said real quick. If you seek reform through the Democratic Party or through the current capitalist system, all you're ever going to do is create systems that actually reinforce capitalism. That's how it works. Capitalism will twist every single thing to its own service. It's not some individual behind the screen pulling the strings. It's basically like putting the cart before the horse. If you create reforms within capitalism, capitalism is going to take those reforms and use it to serve itself. A good example of that is Social Security. Now, Social Security is the fifth rail of American politics, but even conservatives like Social Security because it helps people of a specific age. That was a universal social reform that was preferred by the Socialist Party that the Democratic Party brought into it to neutralize socialism, to neutralize any call for social reorganization of the society or social revolution in the 1930s. FDR specifically adopted that one because the capitalist system can accommodate that. And the capitalist system did accommodate that. So Social Security then is used to buy off workers and to get them tied to the capitalist system because now, if you lose your job, you don't get Social Security anymore. If you lose your job and you're unemployed, the amount of Social Security you're entitled to once you actually, quote unquote, hit retirement age, if that's even a realistic possibility anymore, is so low. So you actually got to work for a job for a specific number of years and make a specific amount of money to have any kind of hope for Social Security at the end of your working life. That's an example of how reforms are co opted by capitalism. You talk about feminism and even civil rights movements, those things are used by the capitalist parties now to get votes for the capitalist parties. They're not used to liberate anybody. They're saying, if you don't vote for the Democratic Party, you're going to lose your right to have an abortion. Well, the Democratic Party got elected and the women still lost their right to have an abortion. That's an example of a reform that was brought about before capitalism was abolished. It's used basically to reinforce capitalism in this country and to neutralize any call for social change. And so you have to have social revolution. You have to have that. That's a necessary thing. And reforms can be part of that, but it can't exist apart from social revolution. You actually have to have a radical social reorganization of society for those reforms to stick and actually mean something in someone's life.
Since you're talking about how capitalism twists these reforms, one of the big things that's happening these days is what people call woke capitalism. And that gets to your idea of how things like transgender or civil rights things, all corporations are all over the place in favor of these progressive ideas. I worked for one of the Fortune 500 companies, the CEO of all people said she supported Black Lives Matters. In the past, you typically didn't hear that type of thing where the CEOs are more overtly conservative. They wouldn't dare criticize police. I unionized my corporation, and I found that was the one thing they would not tolerate is union. They would tolerate transgender, they tolerate different religions, but not union. Kindly speak to how your party is approaching something like woke capitalism that's so slippery and prevalent these days.
Well, we're opposed to capitalism. So you got to remember the reason why a company could support something like Black Lives Matter or transgender rights, or why Target, for example, could have a rainbow flag celebration where they promote specific identity politics that are prevalent in our society, is because it doesn't actually threaten their economic security. They're
Okay.
actually looking to increasing the base of people who are willing to go and shop at Target. So, for example, if I'm a Target CEO, it doesn't cost me any money at all, well, with the possible exception of the radical right who is opposed to wokeness, claiming that they're not going to shop at Target anymore. Like, really, I mean, that's not even realistic because they're not completely on board with that on the radical right. Just because Target has a rainbow flag celebration or something like this where they're highlighting what they call gay rights, they're basically just trying to get gay people who identify with the rainbow flag to come into the Target and spend their money. It doesn't cost them any money to do that. They actually are opening their store up to more populations. But it's possible. I mean, this is a crazy idea. It's possible that those gay couples that they're promoting the rainbow flag to, look, now we're open to gays and everything, we're already shopping at Target. So it's not really
Sure.
making that much of a difference. And it certainly isn't making any difference in society. It isn't empowering anybody for Target to promote what I like the term woke capitalism. It doesn't actually help anybody be empowered. It just lets everybody know that Target now has a rainbow flag on it, and they're going to continue to exploit their workers. They're going to continue to exploit their suppliers, the people that they buy clothes from who are making cents on the dollar in sweatshops in foreign countries. They're going to continue to exploit those people, but they're just going to exploit them now to also the gay community or the trans community or whatever you want to say. It doesn't cost the company anything to take a stand on social issues, and it really just increases their profitability, if anything. And so woke capitalism, we oppose woke capitalism because we oppose capitalism. It doesn't change anything. It doesn't make anyone's life better. It certainly doesn't empower any of their workers to take a stand, which kind of explains why the CEO you're referring to is all about identity politics, all about transgender rights, LGBTQ positive, everything like that, but still against unions because unions actually might threaten their bottom line.
Wow.
Exactly. For them, it really is just pandering. And I've made pains to explain to people because there are many legitimate criticisms of mainstream feminism. And those criticisms are not the feminism part, it's the liberal identity politics part. We're obviously not liberals and we are not for their version of identity politics. We are intersexual socialist feminism, where we see how capitalism divide workers against workers. They've done this for always. All oppressive regimes have divided us with sexism, racism, homophobia, transphobia, ableism, ageism, nationalism, every variety of bigotry. No, we do not need another reason for working people to fight amongst each other. We need to fight for each other, and we all face different forms of oppression, but ultimately we're oppressed under this system of capitalism. Corporations will enter to this, but they will never support any systemic changes that threaten their bottom line. It is ultimately in their best interest often to keep people fighting over these culture wars. That's why you've seen both sides of, I don't want to say both sides because they're kind of the same side, but the Republicans and Democrats love this culture war thing because they can pretend like they are not serving the same masters. But when you get down to it, look at who's funding both parties. They may differ on these wedge issues, but ultimately, as long as the wealthy stay wealthy and the workers stay exploited, they are happy. And if putting a rainbow flag on the orphan crushing machine makes a couple of people happy and tricks them into thinking that spending money is the way to liberation, or supporting the corporation that supposedly mirrors your values, they don't, but supposedly does because they slap a sticker on something, that's not the way to change. And it's ultimately a distraction. Marx talked about how everything is commodified. Of course, Black Lives Matter is going to be commodified. That is not a criticism of Black Lives Matter. That's just what happens under capitalism. They take everything and they make it meaningless and find a way to sell it. It's just a horrible and heartless system, but there are alternatives, and that's what we should look to. And I hope people don't get too disillusioned by capitalism to actually understand that these forms of oppression do exist and that we desperately need to fight them and fight the economic system that allows them, well, I don't want to say allows them to continue because there would still be, of course, bigotry without capitalism, but capitalism definitely enables them and works to perpetuate them.
So how are you reaching out to the voters, supporters in this election? What is your way to communicate with them and to connect with?
Well, we're starting doing primarily online stuff. We don't have a lot of money. It costs a lot of money to
Okay.
be on TV and on the radio and in the press. But we do have beginnings of a press strategy with regard to reaching out to people where they're at. I think that one of the easiest things to create is memes, and memes is just another new form of propaganda, essentially, where you are able to communicate a really complex idea with a picture or some kind of cartoon or something like that. Memes are kind of where it's at right now. They're easily distributable, they're very easy to produce, and they actually pack a lot of meaning in a very, very small package. We can do that. We can do that for free with volunteer work. And we're also creating a donation site where we are trying to get out the message about getting ballot access. We've identified probably a dozen, maybe 15 states where it's going to be fairly easy, relatively speaking, to get onto the ballot. Utah being the first one of them, but we are also looking at, say, North Carolina. We're also looking at possibly Georgia, maybe Iowa, Minnesota, Michigan, New Jersey, places like this where it's going to be, relatively speaking, low cost effort to get ballot access. They require maybe 3 or 4 thousand signatures per state, which we are raising funds to try to get to. But I think that we're using that to hopefully generate some momentum and some interest in the campaign at the very start. We're lucky in the sense that we have sort of a 6 or 8 month head start on the national parties or the duopoly parties, in that they haven't picked their candidates yet. They won't do that formally until August of next year. So we have almost a 10-month head start on them to try to catch up a little bit in areas where we actually can without expending a ton of money and without expending a ton of human resources. Meanwhile, we'll also continue to do interviews like this. We'll also reach out to party locals and local activists in relatively adjacent groups, student groups, civic groups, things like that, people who are working on nonpartisan issues or ballot access issues to try to generate some momentum for the campaign as well. In reality, we're not delusional. Of course, we're not crazy. This is not going to be an easy slog to get votes in this country. But the idea, of course, is to the votes don't really translate into the amount of interest that we generate. Hopefully, we get people who are willing to join the party and work for the party on socialist issues after the campaign is over. Uh, building websites and also building activist networks and connections with people that have experience in running campaigns. While we might not knock anyone's socks off with this campaign. Hopefully, we build a good solid foundation for the next 4 years so that when we hit the road again in 4 years and continue this fight, we'll have a much stronger national organization, we'll have a much stronger state and local organization, and we'll also have a very strong activist network who has a lot of experience running in state and local campaigns so that when it comes time to run for president again, we're not rebuilding the infrastructure. We're utilizing the infrastructure we've already left in place. We're taking people who have experience, who are able to run campaigns and run a much more effective campaign within 4 years than even that we're able to do right now with almost complete volunteers.
One thing I want to, well, a few things I'd like to add. We are just getting started out. We've just recently filed and are self-funded. We don't get paid to do this, and no one working for us other than one staff member is paid. We're all working class people, so it is difficult. It shows how just even to run, we're already facing so many other hurdles that wealthy people who are part of the mainstream political establishment do not face, which is to be expected. But one thing we can do is actually turn that system on its head. To run it as a socialist, I think we realize, like, even if we were to get elected, what would we do if we were elected? We are opposed to this capitalist imperialist system. Being the head of it, if he were to be elected, the first thing he would have to do is fire himself, because what is he doing at the head of this exploitive machine? We want to expose the contradictions within the system. One example, we have to go and collect thousands and thousands of signatures, which, there's a lot of work and it takes resources and volunteers that we could be using to actually campaign. But now I have an excuse to knock on people's doors and talk to them about socialism. And that's something I can't do normally, but when I'm a part of the campaign or even when I'm a candidate, now I can. Now I can walk up to anyone and have an excuse to talk to them about socialism, and I will. And I hope we can build that into a movement that does lead to radical change. I really seriously doubt it's going to come from this campaign, but this is just one piece of the puzzle towards building a strong socialist movement in the US. And we have had it before. We can do it again. There's definitely a need for it. I really believe that if we put the time and effort in and we offer people the one thing that neither the capitalist parties can offer, which is we have real solutions to the problems working class people are facing. We can answer these questions without avoiding them or scapegoating some minority to try to distract from the everyday life that working class people are facing. We have many challenges. One of them is that Americans generally don't have a great understanding of socialism, but that's all the more reason I like to get out there and get some people to listen to me. I think if they hear what we're actually talking about, they're going to realize that when CNN and Fox News cover socialism, what they're talking about is not what we are. We've been drastically misrepresented. Socialism is not anything the government does or taxes or whatever you say. I think we can build a movement out of the fact that both parties have failed to properly represent what working people need. I really am so fortunate to have so many great volunteers to do it with. I strongly encourage anyone out there to look at our statement of principles and think about these issues. You might not agree with us on everything, but you very well may agree with us on the path that we're going. To me, joining the Socialist Party and being part of so many campaigns, including this one, it has been such a rewarding experience. You're bombarded by the news and the way things are and the way things have gotten worse and the way people are suffering every day. To me, just being able to get up and work on this campaign or work towards building the Socialist Party, it really gives my life meaning, because I know that I'm doing something to at least help people and change the way things are. So if you're feeling disillusioned and hopeless, I strongly encourage you, you don't have to get involved in our campaign or even our party, but look around locally. Who needs help? Where can you be of help? There's so much you can do. Even if you don't have a great background in political economy, meet up with some people that really are trying to make a difference. I guarantee you will be paid back all the effort you put in twicefold, because it really is rewarding work.
So how can our audience connect with your campaign? You were mentioning a website. How can they connect with you?
So the easiest way is to just go at SPUSA 2024. We're there everywhere. Socialist Party USA 2024.org is our website. And right now that points to our donation site, but we are within the next couple of weeks going to have our full website launched, which will have position statements from Stephanie and I, platform, other things, other links to other activists and other organizations that people can get involved with. And we'll also link back with the Socialist Party USA itself. SPUSA 2024 is where we're at everywhere. Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, you name it, we're there. Once we get that website launched, you'll definitely be able to check out written versions of what we just told you here. um, and that's just the easiest way to do it. Just go at SPUSA 2024 on your chosen social media platform. I don't think we have TikTok yet. I'm a little bit old to know how to use that, but I imagine that's probably in our future as well. So SPUSA 2024 is where we're at.
All right. All right. Well, thank you too for coming on the podcast today and talking about your campaign and your philosophy and your party.
Oh, for sure. Thank you for having
Yeah.
us.
Yeah, it's great to have this opportunity.
We wish you all the best in your campaign and also in your personal professional life, everything you do.
Thank you very much.